All right, there we are. So, okay, I have to record this for purposes of the university because it's a prerequisite, and I hope you're okay with that. Okay, so no further ado, let's get started. So we have to do this within an hour, and what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to get the presentation bit done in under 40 minutes to allow us enough time to actually chat and to have you ask the questions that you have, because in as far as personal branding goes, it's a very, very personal thing. And there's no right or wrong way to brand because it's up to the individual, right? Okay, so for starters, who am I? So my name is Mavis, and I'm going to get into the different hats that I wear as I actually present this, because ultimately I'm going to use my personal experience to be able to create an overall holistic view of how you go about branding yourself. But so this session in itself is basically to have you think for yourself as an individual. How do you want to go about the process of branding self, right? Just hold on. I'm trying to get rid of this. Okay. All right. Okay. So to give you the contents of how this session is going to run, for starters, I'm going to ask you questions about who it is you are, just to get you thinking about what hats do you actually wear. When you think of self and you think about your brand as an individual, what exactly are you talking about and how does that look for you particularly, right? And then we're going to go into the next session where we talk about where do you find the things that you do. So because you wear different hats, that comes with it's different sets of platforms where you actually share the work. For some people, you are a chef and you have an Instagram page, but at the same time, you're also an academic who has a keen interest in, poverty eradication. And then we're going to go into the 5 Ws, which I'll explain as far as creating a holistic overview of how you actually go about thinking about your personal brand. And then we'll go into the elevator pitch. Then we'll talk about branding yourself. And then I'll give you free resources that you can utilize in the process of branding yourself. Okay. So, okay, I don't know what this is doing. Okay, cool. So for starters, I want us to do a quick exercise. And the reason I asked you to bring a pen and paper is because I'd like you to take notes as we go, to allow yourself to actually make sure that once you're done with this session, you have a start point in as far as what do you see when you think of yourself. So to use myself as an example, right? When you go into the process of determining who you are in as far as what your personal brand is, you'd have to start asking yourself, what hats do you wear? So, for example, I am a scholar at IDS and I study globalization, business, and development. In addition to that, I do MC work where I serve as a master of ceremonies, but I also do public speaking work. And I love to dabble into sort of writing think pieces about trade development. And in addition to that, there's a radio personality, brand consultant. So you can see at that point, it's a mouthful. And many of us wear different hats, but it's a question of what matters at one particular moment, depending what it is you're trying to achieve, right? So in this session, I'm coming to you to talk to you about personal branding. So it matters little, that I have got necessarily a interest in globalization, business, and development. So there's 3 things that come key, right? Is the fact that I'm a brand consultant, the fact that I'm a public speaker, and the fact that I'm a writer. And those 3 hats really speak to you in this moment. So if I was to come forward and introduce myself, I would rather lead with the fact that I'm a brand consultant, follow that up with the fact that I'm a public speaker, hence why the lecturing, and then the writing. Because much of everything else that I do, yes, it creates credibility, but it's not particularly relevant to this session. So if you were to do one thing, and that is to find out where exactly I can find your work, right? So here's one thing that I want you to do. I want you to Google yourself. And I'm going to do this in real time so that you can see the fact that it's quite interesting, because when you Google yourself, you have a better understanding of what people see and what exactly they find when they're looking for you, and whether or not you've positioned yourself to be able to speak to that. So we're going to do an exercise, and then I'm going to ask you what you believe personal branding is. So for starters, in this session, I did see that we've got Chanel Bayard. I really hope I'm not hacking your surname. Okay, so I'm Googling Chanel, and I find this is what I pick up on the onset, just from Googling Chanel. I know that she lives in Guyana, or she's from Guyana. I don't know if she currently lives there. I know that she's got a keen interest in mental health because there's an article of her in the Guyana Chronicle where she speaks about safeguarding your mental health. In addition to that, I can see that she's done some work to talk about mental health during the pandemic. And I know if I wanted to contact Chanel, I can find her on Twitter as well as Instagram, because these two platforms are available upon Googling her. And that's just from one search, right? Just one search. Because in essence, this is Chanel's brand, because this is what I see on the onset. If I do dig a bit deeper, I might be able to see that there's a lot more than what meets the eye. And that's truly upon actually digging. But then when you talk about personal branding, sometimes somebody only has as much as 30 seconds to be able to understand who you are holistically, because you're not in the room to be able to explain who you are. Which brings us to understanding what is personal branding. So I'm going to stop sharing this for a quick minute, just to allow you to answer that question for me. So I'm going to pick on Louisa Gauss. Louisa, what do you think personal branding is? Just a mere sentence.
Oh, wow. You caught me cold. So yeah, I think you already kind of like you kind of touched it. It's what people see when they Google you. What is the first impression you make, and also what is coming after this first Google search. Like what are you representing, maybe as well?
Yeah. That's excellent, actually, because that goes to show that you understand that personal branding is basically the perception people have of you if you're not in the room, if you're not there to personally introduce yourself, because they have to do that search themselves, and they have to be able to discern for themselves who you are without you necessarily being there to work them through the details. Okay, thank you. I'm going to pick on Shota yet again. I had a chat with you earlier before the session started. Shota, what do you think personal branding is?
Well, personal branding can be a strong point representing you. For example, if you are measuring in development, rural development, for example, that can be a strong point for you to appeal you in order to find a job. So strong point.
Okay, so what I love about what you just said is that you link it back to your professional, establishment. As in, are you establishing yourself as a expert in development, and which part of development exactly is it that you would like to make sure that when people are looking for an expert in a particular field, are you top of mind? And if they were to simply, put in the words IDS and they're looking for trade development experts, do you come top of mind? Because first of all, is there material on the internet or wherever it is that you might dub fit to be able to build your brand? Can they find that? Because it's one thing to do the work behind the scenes, and that's great. But there's also a sense of, can people actually get the holistic overview of who it is you are? So this is what I did as well. So I took time out before the session started, and I Googled a few of you. And I just thought it would be interesting to see what I would find, because I think often enough, we understand who we are because we live in our bodies day to day. But are we able to understand what people see when they actually are trying to find out who it is we are? And that, in essence, is your brand. So, Sarah Gregory, I know that you are at IDS. You're studying international development. You have a history in hospitality because you worked at some industry or company that does hospitality. You have done a tremendous amount of volunteer work. And you've also worked with a refugee volunteer program called Wycombe. Sorry, you're in the room.
Yeah, my local area is High Wycombe, so it's the Wycombe Refugee Partnership.
So that in essence is me picking up on your personal brand without you ever having interacted with me. I could easily work for the World Bank, Human Resources Department, and if I was to find out and you applied for a job, that's what I would pick up in as far as who you are. And I picked this up from LinkedIn. And then Eunice, I hope I'm saying your name right, Wangari, you are at IDS, obviously, hence why being in this session. You're a postgraduate researcher. Your profile is available on the IDS alumni platform, which was great because there was an entire sort of a write-up of your profile in one place, and there was even a link in that profile that took me to the NGO that you've done work with. And I also know that you have been a visiting researcher at Harvard, and that was within a good 3 minutes of Googling you. Just real quick, I was able to pick this up. Eunice, are you in the room by any chance? I really don't know if I'm saying your name right, though. I really sincerely hope I am. Okay, I'll move on. Sarah Jane Mungo, I picked this. Oh, by the way, I picked Eunice's information up from her IDS profile on the IDS alumni website, which all of you here have got access to. Sarah Jane Mungo, I picked this up from Facebook. You're a feminist at heart and believe that one's true worth can be established if you just do some self-searching. You presently live in Trinidad and you've got extensive experience in marketing. Sarah, are you here? Okay, so the reason I did this exercise was simply to create an understanding of how it is you go about building your brand with the understanding of what people would see when they look for you. And I think a lot of the time when we talk about, Googling self, it sounds like a very conceited thing to do. It just seems like, why on earth would I Google myself? But in essence, that's how you go about understanding what people see when they look at you when you're not in the room to speak for yourself. Now, for this session, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to create an understanding of what happens when you're not presently there. And this is basically external branding. And then internal branding when you are presently there, because those are two types of branding, because sometimes you are in the room to speak for yourself and be able to relay who you are, and other times you're not. So between those two, it's a question of how do you go about creating the content for when you're not there, and how do you go about ensuring that when you are in the room, you're able to communicate it effectively, concisely, and precisely so that you can actually get the attention of the person you're speaking to, right? Just for starters. Now, while I do this, right, I'm going to work you through the 5 W's that you should ask yourself. I want you to take notes of what comes to mind. And I want you to start with asking yourself, what hats do I wear? And I want you to be as fluid as possible. Yes, they're the formal hats, but they're also the informal hats, right? And being able to discern where those fit in the boxing and the packaging of you as an individual. So when I ask you, what hats do you wear? Start with things like, I love to bake, so I have an interest in baking. I have a true love for dogs, so I am a dog lover. I have a true love for people, and I've been in the sphere of poverty, elevation, and development. I aspire to be a world thinker and expert in the field of, in the field of trade or health security or climate change. These are very different hats to you. And sometimes you're about to fill the hat, as in you're not necessarily already at the place where you have stepped into that role as yet, because you're probably in the process of doing so, hence why you're probably pursuing a master's degree in that particular field, whichever it is, right? And be as fluid as possible to allow yourself a chance to be able to sieve through, like, which has to go, which can be public, which shouldn't be public, what matters to the person that it is my audience, right? So as you note those things down, don't worry about it, because we're going to work through the process of knowing where to put those different things about self. Okay. So the 5 W's are, in essence, when you are Googled, when you have your North Star person, the person who in your wildest dreams is supposed to be looking for you, Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, I don't know who you would think. Is it the CEO of the World Bank? Is it the president of the African Development Bank? Who would you want to have Google you in your wildest dreams, right? And the reason I would start at the North Star is because you can then trickle your way down. So who do you want to have find you is a question that you need to ask yourself. Because if you want to become a subject expert and you want to work alongside researchers, I would assume that you want to have your material on ResearchGate, which means that that's possibly where they would find subject experts. If you want to find yourself a subject expert that speaks at the the G20 summit, then you would want to be somebody who's eligible to speak. So you would have a public profile as a speaker as well as a subject expert for the two to go hand in hand, right? So the question is, who do you want to have find you? Where exactly do you see yourself going? And so in essence, who is in those rooms to find you and to be able to present you? Is it the human resources lady? What exactly is she looking for? Is she looking for your eligibility for a job? Who is looking for you, right? So now that you've asked yourself that question, the second part is, what do you want people to find, right? So after they've Googled you, what do you want them to find? Should they find articles where you express your interest or thoughts on a matter such as food security, climate change, or whichever your interest is? Should they find that you present yourself, you're eloquent because you want to speak on a panel? Should they find that you're hardworking and you've done some field work and field research? What exactly do they find, right? And it's okay if this material does not exist at present, because when you start to think about your personal brand, you can then get into the process of doing, which leads me to, when do you create what you want them to find? So in the event that you want to be dubbed a expert in the field of development, and you're actually supposed to align yourself with those things that you want to do. So that means that you're supposed to be doing volunteer work in that field, or you're supposed to be working alongside a already established subject expert as an assistant researcher. What exactly would set you up to be able to create that content that's supposed to be available? And when I say content, I use the term loosely, and I'm not talking necessarily about having content in the form of articles. It could be simply having content that speaks to it in the form of a job description on LinkedIn. But in order for you to be able to have that as your job description and to be able to list the things that you've done, it should have been work that you've done. So that's the content that you're creating, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be in the mainstream understanding of content in as far as pictures on Instagram or whichever. It's a question of, what do they find? And when have you created what it is they'll find? Because it's not enough to create a brand that depicts an image that's not truthful to the work that you do on the ground, right? And so where do they find it? Do they find it on LinkedIn? Do they find it on Facebook, Twitter, ResearchGate, I don't know, Medium? Where exactly do they find this material? Is it in a newspaper article? Where do they find what makes it true? Because usually there's reporting that happens thereafter. Should you write a report back think piece on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn has got the option of you writing sort of like a blog piece, but not in the sort of uniform way of doing it, where you just write a report of what it is that you've done. And many of you actually have the material already. It's just not available online because you've either only circulated it amongst yourselves, or you haven't been able to sort of take out and comb out the things that can be public information so as to report back to the work that you're doing. And that's why personal branding is so important. Okay. And then there's the how. As soon as they found you and they now understand that, hey, Sarah is great for this role because she's got experience in marketing and she has done extensive work as a volunteer. So she's willing to get her hands dirty. Now, how do I contact her? Do I have to slide into her DMs? Because that's not professional. So it's a question of, is your email address available on these platforms? Are you reachable? Or do people have to literally know your aunt, your cousin's dog, sister to be able to get a hold of you? Because that's not okay. So it's a question of, even on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is a very professional platform. So they could actually go into your direct messages. But what would be better is if your email address was on your LinkedIn profile, because that would simplify the entire process. So just things to think about. Okay. So the 5 W's are in as far as who's your audience. And I want you to go through this session writing down who your target audience is. And you can write down professors, human resource employees in multilateral organizations, a G Summit interviewers or panelists, the people who actually create the panels, or it could be events organizers. It could be whoever it is you think should be your target audience. And then the question is, what content do they find? Do you want them to find newspaper clippings? Do you want them to be able to find you on LinkedIn? Where do they find you, and what are they finding? And then when is a question of, have you taken time out to be able to create what they find? And then where do they find it? Which platforms would you like to be active on? Because some people love to be on Facebook and to share their opinions and can create a very professional profile on Facebook. But the next might be more comfortable on LinkedIn because they feel that it's a lot more professional. But another person might feel that they're a lot more comfortable on Twitter to create a following that truly dubs them a subject expert. It's a question of which platform are you most comfortable with? And then it's a question of, how do you want to be accessible? Not everybody is comfortable having their email address on a public platform. So it's a question of, what are you most comfortable with? And that's where you'd have to actually do the work. Okay. So the most fun part for me, I wanted to minimize this because I wanted to see your faces, but it might not work. Okay, so branding yourself, right? This is the fun part of the section. There's two images in front of you. And on your right, I want you to tell me what you see. And on your left, I want you to tell me what you see. But I want you to think of it with the 5 W's in mind. The what, the where, the who, the how, the when, right? Think about that and think about what it is you see in front of you. And as far as, how might these people have branded themselves to become who it is they are in these images? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for a little bit so that I can see your faces. Okay, let me get this into a gallery view. Okay, let me pick on Adam. Adam, are you there?
Hello.
Hi, how are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad.
Okay, so I have 2 images. It's quite difficult to see them. Maybe I should go back to sharing. Chris, how about you assist me with choosing who exactly should give us some input? Also, it becomes difficult to speak on a matter when you can't see what I'm talking about. Okay, so Adam, your go. You go ahead.
So in terms of what I see, I'd say the image on the left, the lady's branding herself certainly as a public speaker in that respect, and perhaps has more knowledge within the field, because you do have to have an element of that to be able to present to other people.
Absolutely.
And I'd say the image on the right does reflect that as well, because you need to have some seniority within your field to be able to go to a summit, as well as significant social and professional networks within that as well.
Mm-hmm. I like the fact that you said a significant social networking, because networking is also a huge part of personal branding, because you also have to, and we're going to talk about that in talking about the elevator pitch and just basically the in-person part of branding, because right now we're sort of concentrating on the online. But Adam, that's really a solid point. Chris, can you assist with who else should give their input?
Sorry, I think it would be good if people can just jump in, because I don't really want to pick on people.
You're
so
nice
I think
I am.
yeah, but there's a couple of people who've got the videos on, so maybe you can jump in.
Are you guys being a bit shy? Honestly, look, this session, you're supposed to get out of this session as much as possible, because personal branding is a very, very personal exercise. It's about what it is you want to be perceived as, and then learning how to communicate that want into the outside world. So please feel free, as comfortable as possible, to make sure that you can get the most out of this, because much of what it is I'm telling you is probably stuff that you probably already know and just need to reaffirm so that you can implement it in your own personal life. So let this session be something that you can utilize to be able to walk away from here and start your own process, or maybe better enhance if you've already started. So please feel free. The image on the left and the image on the right.
Well, what I would feel is a difference if you compare these two is on the right, you have like a title in it. So that could give you credibility or not, like We20 Summit. Mm-hmm. So if it's like some fancy UN conference, that title already gives you extra credibility. Mm-hmm. However, in terms of visual branding, if I don't have any other images, I'm not sure who we are talking about. Is it the woman on the left in the center? Is it the man? I'm not sure. So I would possibly only choose that image if it was clear who I am for that branding to work. Versus the left image is like, again, you don't know it doesn't give away context. I can just see there's a woman looking relatively self-confident trying to say something.
Yeah.
But I don't know what she's talking about. And I know if it was in a school or if it was in front of the UN, I have no clue.
Okay, fair point. So what I love about your input is that you basically realize that an image can tell 1,000 words, right? So how it is you brand yourself can also be done in imagery, because if I see a picture of you and I'm looking for a speaker for something, and I already have in the back of my mind that you're an international trade expert, if I see this picture, I'm a lot more inclined to want to work with you. But in addition to that, what the image tells, the one has got wording on top of it for you to understand that this was a summit, and you could actually go ahead and like Google W20 summit. And then in the other case, you can see that she's a speaker, but it's a question of what does she speak on, right? Let me get one person's input, and then I'll tell you what it is I have to say about 2 images. Please feel free to jump in.
I try to imagine myself there, and I think someone's body language is really important. And when people talk with hand gestures and make themselves look confident and presentable and open, then it really draws you into them as a person, because as much as like what you represent is really important, I think your personality can be just as important in branding.
Yeah, okay. I love that. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so these are 2 images, and the one on your left, we're on this, I don't know how your screen looks, but nonetheless, the one on the left, so her name is Shoshana Zuboff. She is a surveillance capitalism expert. And what's interesting about Shoshana is she's the first in her field to come forth and actually call this thing surveillance capitalism. I'm not entirely certain if you have any understanding of what happens in the internet realm, where your data is harvested, and a lot of these surveillance capitalist organizations like Facebook as well as Google have basically been taking your data and being using machine modification to be able to advertise, right? But that's just in-depth understanding of who she is. So she's the first to speak on this matter called surveillance capitalism, actually go forth into the world and say that this is a world problem and we actually need global governance for this matter, right? And so Shana has basically set herself apart in a field of, internet technology, and has gotten to a place where if ever you needed somebody to speak on what happens with your data, whether it's data privacy, how one can go about the governance of it, she would be top of mind. And she's done this as a researcher. So she's largely an academic who has now gone into the space of speaking on the things that she has researched. So she's what you would call a subject expert, right? And so what's interesting about the way that she's branded herself is she's an academic who's done the research, meaning that she's done the behind the scenes work, which a lot of you, I presume, are doing, and has learned how to communicate her research into the world so that the world understands what she's doing. And she's published a book called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. And Barack Obama actually recommended her book as one of his top, I think, 20 books for the year 2020. So she's done amazing work in as far as branding herself. But you can tell that she doesn't go into the branding sphere solely for the purposes of publicity, but rather to communicate her findings as well as her passions. And so on your right-hand side, there's a W20 Summit. And these are speakers who've basically established themselves in their field and are who you would call upon as subject experts in the case where you want to talk about a matter. And so I'm sure many of us have probably watched, the G20, the G7, whichever, and you've been able to listen to subject experts share their insights on matters that affect the world. So whether it's health experts, whether it's climate change, whether it's trade, whichever global issue there is to be discussed. So for you, when I describe these two these images, what image sparked for you in as far as this is what I would like to do for myself? Because most of the time when somebody speaks about personal branding, you already have an image for yourself in the back of your mind. And there's a question of, how do I communicate this into the world? And that's what you should sit with, because that's what you grab hold of. If you've got ambitions to be in the public eye, then there's a great deal of personal branding that should be done. However, there's also the case where you are a researcher who's got a great interest in academic research to be able to find solutions and answers to matters. And a part of you would like to share this research with the world, but not necessarily become sort of like a public figure somewhat, right? So there's also that discerning that there is branding oneself and being able to come across as a subject expert without the glitz and the glam that are sort of associated with public figures, because it is a serious matter. Because if you have done extensive work and research, it's quite important that that research be communicated to the outside world, right? Okay. So now that we've sort of established creating the brand, externally, it's a question of, how do you create the brand internally when you are in the room? And just to sort of have you understand that, I will revisit the external just to show you how it is you can actively brand yourself with a few examples that I have later in the presentation. I just have to be cognizant of time. I've got about 10 minutes to run through this elevator pitch. Okay, so for starters, what is an elevator pitch? Just so that we can quickly just get input so that I'm not talking the whole time. Feel free, just one person, just quickly chip in. What is an elevator pitch?
It's supposed to be basically like a 30-second, maybe maximum 2-minute summary of, well, if it's one for yourself, it would be, introduction to who you are, what your interests are, potentially, why are you speaking to this person, where your interests overlap.
Okay, so I think the reason why I chose an elevator pitch as sort of like getting to a place where you can speak on self, and you're right, by the way, about what an elevator pitch is because when you can master an elevator pitch, you've basically mastered your personal branding, because what you summarize within that 30 seconds to 2 minutes is exactly who you are. But oftentimes you also have to understand that depending what room you are, will also necessitate what is relevant. Because at the beginning of this presentation, I spoke about the fact that you wear many different hats and not all of them are relevant at the same time. But depending what it is you are trying to get out of this interaction will tell you what your brand is. So sometimes you have to be flexible enough to adjust your brand depending what it is you're trying to get out of a situation. But at the same time, what you would put within those 30 seconds, is exactly what is important to build. So if you are going to introduce yourself and you're going to roll with the fact that you are an international trade expert, it's a question of, if this person wants to go Google you, what would they find that sort of backs what you just introduced yourself as? And that's how you brand yourself. Okay. So the first thing that you need to know is you have to gauge, you have to pick your moments, because you also need to know like what exactly is important in this moment. Because if a person is in a hurry and they're busy leaving the room and you're trying to grab their attention within 30 seconds, it would be terrible for you to intercept while they're trying to walk past you. Probably be best you guys actually end up in an elevator on your way down because you're standing still, or you're standing next to a door where they're about to wait for their car. So you have to gauge your moments. If they're speaking to a group of people, maybe stand next to the person and sort of indicate that you'd like to get their attention, and then wait after they've spoken. Because we've all seen terrible pitches where the person either intercepts a conversation, steps in front of the person while they're walking away. Just you have to gauge your moment, right? And then you have to read the person because you have to know your audience. If you're speaking to the World Bank president, I assume this is a very busy person, and I'm not entirely certain as to whether or not you can just walk up to them, or whether you'd have to speak to their secretary and ask if you could have a minute of their time. So you have to read the person. The only interesting thing about an elevator pitch is sometimes you don't have ample time to have been able to plan this. So it's literally like gauge, read the person, choose an outcome. You probably usually have like 3 or 4 minutes to like decide what your outcome is going to be. But let me walk you through that. Then you have to choose. You have to decide what is your outcome from this pitch. As in, are you hoping to walk away with a meeting secured? Would you like the possibility of employment? Would you like to have this person as a mentor and for you to become their protege? What's your outcome? What exactly do you hope to achieve from this conversation? Because I often find that when one does an elevator pitch, you leave it so open-ended. It's like, hey, I am Mavis and I'm studying globalization, business and development at Sussex University, and I have a keen interest in development. That's great. So what now? Like, after you've told me this, what exactly would you like from me or the person that you're speaking to? So it's very important to be able to choose an outcome. And you're welcome to decide how you're going to do that, whether you're going to have 3 outcomes, as in, I'd like, I don't recommend 3, I usually recommend 1, but you can decide, look, I'd like 15 minutes of your time on a call, because that's something people are more often likely to want to commit to 15 minutes of their time than they are to a whole entire meeting where they must leave their office and go sit down somewhere. It's completely taking them out of their space and comfort, whereas 15 minutes of their time is a call. They can do it anywhere, really. So sometimes you have to also look at like, what's the most convenient thing that you can ask for of this person, and you can go later build on that after you've established contact. And so when you do your introduction, get straight to the point, don't ramble. It's great that you have an extensive resume, but what's important is to choose which hats will you bring forth in this conversation and then stick to those. And so after you've chosen your outcome, you have to communicate it, and then you have to establish contact. So this is the trickiest one, admittedly, because it's a question of, do you give a business card or do you ask them for a business card? And we all know that oftentimes it said you ask for the business card, because when a person is busy, very influential, it's highly unlikely that they'll email you. So you'd probably have to be the one to make contact. And also, when you do read the situation, if you do find that they've got a PA lingering next to them, leave them with, I will be sure to get your details from your PA, right? And so 30 seconds, straight to the point, and you're done. That's your elevator pitch. And what's nice about teaching yourself an elevator pitch in your spare time is that by the time you do actually have an opportunity where you've got 2 minutes max to be able to make an impression, and it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, you've already taught yourself how to do it. So we hear about elevator pitches, but rarely do we actually follow through and teach ourselves how to do an elevator pitch before finding ourselves in a situation where we must communicate who we are to somebody. So things to consider when you are practicing your elevator pitch is, what value do you bring? Because you must be of value to this person. Because is it that this interaction will be very, very rich for them because you've done amazing research in a field that they're interested in? Also, is it convenient for them to actually speak to you? And are you knowledgeable in the field that they operate in, or are you completely taking them off track from what it is that even interests them? And is the interaction authentic and honest? Because sometimes honesty gets you a lot further than sort of rubbing people's egos and making the interaction incredibly sort of futile. And futile is for a lack of a better word, honestly. Sort of making the interaction very watered down and sort of just lacks authenticity. Okay. So the reason I decided to basically look into how to brand yourself is because now that you've got this you've started the process of thinking about, what do I want my brand to be? What would I want to communicate if I had a 30 seconds to get across who it is I am? What hats do I wear? How do I go about making sure that this information is available online? I would like to just walk you through a few of the social platforms that I use to sort of as a communicator for who it is I am, because I use social media as a branding platforms basically, right? So for starters, time check, we have 2 minutes to run through this because I'd like to get some questions. So if you look at my Twitter feed as well as my Facebook feed, there's a lot of consistency and uniformity, because if you were to find me on, let's say, Twitter, and you're interested to go see my profile on Facebook, it'll be very easy to see that this is the same Mavis that you're looking at, simply because my name is consistent. The way that I present my feed is consistent, and I have provided basically follow-up as to where it is you can contact me. My email address is available, my website is available, all of that is in one place. And also I try to give you a very rounded overview of who I am. And I tell you, I'm a blogger, I'm a civil engineer, depending what platform I use for what. So I've separated the Twitter platform is very development orientated, and my Facebook is very charity orientated. Although those two speak to each other, I've just used them separately, simply because it's easier to sort of separate those hats that I wear. In addition to that, make sure that you've got a professional email, an email signature, just because first impressions count. And sometimes, your email that comes through, the person has to want to read it and make it brief, straight to the point, which is sometimes when you're looking for opportunities via email, it's also important to treat it as an elevator pitch, straight to the point, tell them what it is that you want. And then the follow-up email, you can become extensive in as far as why you would like to actually meet this person, depending their response. And so my LinkedIn profile also, the same thing goes. And as I look at this, I realize my email address is not there. Well, the website is there, but sometimes nobody's going to go to your website to go and look for your email. And if you would like to create a website, there's a free platform called Wix, and they've got, you don't even have to have like a development background, because they give you templates and you just edit them. And it's really, really straightforward. But I did leave the resources that you can utilize to create what I'm talking about. So I will leave you to read about Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and how to utilize those platforms in your free time, simply because I'm trying to be cognizant of time, to work you through the free resources. So design, especially for those that, want to create some pleasing graphics for your social platforms, your events, whichever it is that you do, there's a website called Canva, and it's amazing because it too has templates that you can utilize. And then Resume Worded is this website where you can upload your resume and the job description, and they'll tell you how well you match, especially because we do live in a world where people don't physically go through your resume. There isn't necessarily somebody who sits in an HR office and sieves through 1,000 resumes. Generally, the computer will just pick out the best candidates. And this allows you to sort of like reword your resume to be able to suit the particular job. And publishing, if you are an academic or even just somebody who loves to write and would like to do opinion pieces as well as think pieces, as well as just papers, there's ResearchGate as well as Medium, both free. And there's a spelling error there, don't worry about it. Linktree is basically this platform where you can put all your contact details on one link, so that people can actually find everything that you do in one space. And I'll leave you to do the to-do list in your own free time. So for now, I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and I'll allow you to ask questions, and we can call it a wrap in approximately 10 minutes. Thank you. That was the presentation. I sincerely hope it was helpful. I tried to put a lot of information in a presentation of 40 minutes, but I do think that it gets you thinking. It allows you to get to a place where you have an overall holistic overview of what branding actually is, and to get you started in the process of doing the work, because branding is actual work. You have to put in the work in order to be able to create the brand and image that you would like. Thank you. So I'll take questions just so that we can chat, and you can maybe ask me some questions in the places that you yourself have struggled in as far as creating a brand for yourself, and how you can possibly sort of fix some of those glitches. All right. And I think that is a session on personal branding. Thank you so much for taking your afternoon out to listen to me. If you have any questions, my contact details are in the presentation on the last page. Feel free to drop me an email. I will try my best to respond when I can. And really, if you do need a consultation meeting, I will send you an invoice. That was a joke. I will help where I can. That was a joke. But have a good afternoon. Thank you so much for being with us.